Less than a year ago, it was no great. No.
Not in 40 years have I seen so much fruit and titillating stuff, meat, in the speech from the throne. And here from Victoria to help me understand it is my colleague Clem Chapple. Clem, when do you recall seeing a speech from the throne like this with all these goodies and some of these other things in it?
I don't think I've ever seen one like this. I've seen some intentions, but they were always very vaguely and guardedly put, Jack. This is really specific, and the agenda is almost laid out. There's so many dates and names and committees and advisory councils built into this throne speech that there's a real discipline built in. This stuff is going to happen, and we can't go back and say it was only a vague promise. These are specific promises.
This is part of his technique, like he did when he appointed his cabinet. Get this and that and so done by such and such a date.
That's right. The discipline is built in. This is an assignment list. It's not just vague philosophical ramblings.
Now, what strikes you as the most important stuff in the speech?
Well, we knew we were going to get things like Royal Commission on Education, but I like the little things like this. A gutsy move is to say, right now we're going to eliminate two-member ridings in the legislature.
Right.
If he had waited for another year, Jack, he could have got away with that. How many times have you heard a premier or a government say they're going to change the voting system, which got them in, and then actually change it and take a real chance of getting them kicked out? I kind of like that one. But as you know, the labor code changes, and his attempt to fight abortion by increasing funding to single mothers and daycare and so on. These are other gutsy moves. They're
okay, let's look at that labor code thing, because I've been phoning around this afternoon. A lot of people are very worried because while he doesn't give the specifics in the legislation, he says we're going to break fresh ground. The changes that govern the Industrial Relations Committee in the Act will restore the democratic rights of individuals in the workplace. What do you think that is?
Well, that could be almost anything. I mean, some people were asking him today if that means right to work, and he didn't know what a right to work meant, and I'm not sure that I do either, but it plays havoc with the union movement.
That's what I think. I think it means it's a strong hint about the removal of the closed shop provision, and if you remove the closed shop provision, which would technically meet the requirements of restoring the democratic rights of individuals, that would collapse the hiring halls in the construction industry.
I guess at worst it would. At least it is going to diminish the power of the union to tell the worker what to do.
It's unlikely the changes are going to affect the employers much, so the changes are for the unions. And the other one is the forgotten third parties who suffer most. I think that probably means he's going to tighten up on the picketing restrictions which are already in vogue.
Hurting people, third-party victims, and he also mentioned during the IWA strike that he felt very strongly for people who were caught out in a strike who didn't want to be, and I'm thinking of a number of locals of the IWA who didn't want that strike, Jack.
That's fair enough, but we'll have to wait until we get the details presented by the Labour Minister to find out specifically if it means the continuation of this quiet atmosphere or if it means a bubble and stew. Eh? What do you think?
Well, yes. I don't know. He said it's going to be controversial. I think it is, but you know, he's been saying a lot of controversial things, and I would say the honeymoon is still, has still got a bit of a glow on it.
Yeah, but I would speculate it could mean the end of the closed shop and tighter picketing restrictions on the unions. Now, is there anything in this, the anti-abortion, would it be right to say that he's brought in a number of steps to cut down abortions?
Well, he may think they will, and if you improve the lot of the single mother, of the unwed mother, by having single mothers get a better deal, by having better daycare and so on, and by having better opportunity for adoptions, presumably that would tip the scale a little bit. I don't know by how much, but obviously if you promoted it hard and you got people thinking about it, and he's got a good point there to some extent, maybe it will change the tide a bit, but abortions are growing very quickly, and I somehow doubt that this will have a big effect.
Now, he didn't mention student loans once, but he has mentioned some kind of free enterprise incentives for education, like the tax-deductible registered educational savings plan. It's a little bit elitist, isn't it?
Well, it is, especially when you put it with the fact that he wants to find some kind of break for the people who use independent schools, and he says he recognizes the growing and significant part that independent schools play. Plus, he's going for giving new scholarships to the high achievers in high school so that they'll get into university. This means it's a performance-oriented school system that he is wanting to enhance at the moment anyway. And that is a bit elitist, yes?
Yeah, it does, because he says that those grade 8 to 12 with high academic standard will earn credits towards the cost of their post-secondary education, and a government program to match corporate and private donations towards scholarships. There'll be a scream about that, I suspect.
Well, I would think so. It's not the egalitarian approach that we're used to.
Now, on the Royal Commission, the guy who's going to do the Royal Commission on Education is the man, Barry Sullivan, who did the Noise case and who did the study on prevention of sexual abuse in the school system. I felt that was a kind of unusual choice, but it may be the right choice.
Well, certainly there couldn't be any, I hope there wouldn't be any connection between his last performance in public and this. I guess it's a lawyer who could do a good job. What I'm interested in there, Jack, is that he's been given a full year to do his job. This won't be any slapdash preordained thing. He's going to be able to go about it in exactly the way he wants without any interference.
Nor will it be a 3-year job. It'll be 1988 and we'll have the report.
That's right. It'll be a good amount of time, I think, to do a proper job, but not an excessive one that they want to just get rid of.
Now, you know, he said offhandedly about nothing was sacred, the BC ferries, etc., as an offhand remark. What do you make of his task force on privatization and cutting the debts of crown corporations? Is he really going to go for broke to wipe out a lot of these government commissions, studies, and crown corporations?
Well, I have to think that's a little bit of hot air. Who wants the BC Ferry Corporation with its $57 million annual debt? You can't run a ferry corporation with any less and still have it be significant. That's why that's why it became public in the first place. What other significant corporations, apart from the ones he's already announced, like BC Place and BC Development Corporation? These things, to me, are methods of handing out patronage or help to the private industry when it needs it. I can't see any major thing happening there. And how do you get rid of public debts? I don't know how you do that without swallowing them.
You freeze them and put them aside and hope you can generate money in the free enterprise, BC Enterprise Corporation. But what about ICBC? Do you think that might be anathema to him? It doesn't make money. It merely breaks even and charges the premiums necessary to break even. Have there any scuttlebutt about it perhaps being threatened at all?
Well, only very little. And the point that is made is that it has to break even by law, I think.
Right.
But it just stays breaking even. It's a good question to ask. Should there be money made off the requirement that you insure to an honest amount for driving your car on the highway?
Do I detect a tinge of the old work for welfare program in his various outlines today?
They'll never give up, will they? They'll never give up. They believe they can employ those employable welfare recipients, and it looks like they're going to try again. And that's fine if they do, but haven't all these people tried before, and didn't Vander Zalm become famous for that?
Yeah, he did, but I see it's in there again. There'll be employment training programs for able-bodied and welfare, and more money, did he not say, for single parents and
single
families?
Parents, yes, and families, in straight welfare rates, yes. He has promised that all the way along, and now here it is again, firmed up.
TV coverage by the fall. I imagine we're going to have to watch Question Period every day.
Do we really want that? It'll make my life easier, I have to admit. But I don't know how well that sort of thing is watched by the general public.
Was he specific in his sex education guidelines? Did you understand that we're going to have a fairly straightforward program about the AIDS epidemic?
Well, I believe it will be. I think that he'll be overruled in terms of the non-specificity of that he seems to have liked in the past. You can't get serious about AIDS. If AIDS is what we're aiming at here, you can't get serious about that without being specific. And I think that's going to all be in place before he gets anywhere near it.
So to sum up, the only kind of explosion that might come pretty soon when Hanson brings in his Labour amendments would be in the Labour field, where he's talking now about restoring the democratic rights of individuals in the workplace.
I think that's the one that will be the hottest, because what it's facing is the big organized area of the NDP and the labor movement. And of course he's going to get in a lot of trouble, Jack, because he didn't promise in this throne speech cheaper beer for the working men.
Oh, he forgot that particular promise. But he did do a couple of other things. He promised some more money for the opposition. Now that was a good PR move.
A good gesture, and I think it will make a difference. I think that really is putting out a hand to the opposition, and rather than just tricking it as it's been done in the past and keeping it down.
However, the atmosphere in the House today seemed to be very pleasant.
Oh, yes. Yes, of course, we're in transition, and we have a leader with the NDP who's on the way out. And so there's not really much point in getting nasty at this stage, especially when you have such a bunch of positive promises coming forth. At least that's the way it sounds.
The nastiness, unhappily, will undoubtedly come later. I'm grateful for your expertise, my colleague Clem Chapple, BCTV in Victoria. Now here's Ted with the rundown.
Tonight on Webster, as fear of AIDS spreads, the number of support groups for victims and their families grows. For the past 4 years, British Columbians have been able to get both support and information from a single source. Tonight, Webster takes you on a tour of the offices and facilities of AIDS Vancouver. Coming up after the break, what's the point of lengthy prison terms if convicts routinely serve only a portion of their sentence? And is parole being used against the citizens the courts are trying to protect? Webster asks Ole Ingstrup, the new chairman of the National Parole Board.
If he brings in what I suspect he'll bring in, removal of the closed shop, the shit will hit the fan.
Say a couple words for our email, please.
Yeah, what do you want me to say?
That's good.
Okay.
Nothing that the chairman of Canada's National Parole Board ever does is right. Or so you would think, according to the headlines. At least a couple of times a year we have screams from the populace about so-and-so being released too early and too often from the prison system. Here's the man who's had the job for the past 10 months, and his name is Ole Ingstrup. Correct, Mr. Ingstrup?
That's right.
Now, I have two cases in front of me. First of all, you were going to let a man serving 3 life terms for the murder rapes of 2 teenage girls out of prison on unescorted day passes. And due to the uproar from the public, the parole board cancelled them. Why was it thought to give them in the first place?
Well, of course, it's difficult for me to discuss individual cases. We have a Privacy Act in this country, and I like to abide by the laws of the land.
But you can't use them to hide behind.
That's right.
If that man had got out and done something, we'd all have been in trouble.
That's right. I can tell you in general that what happened in that case was that I got some news, I looked into the file, and I thought that the parole board should have a sober second look at the case, and this is exactly what we are doing. On the 7th of April, a panel will be looking into the case and we will get a new decision. We have got some new information that was important.
And then there was another case where you acted toughly, and that was where you gated a man called Parry Ross because of some threats he was believed to have been made, and suddenly a judge in BC said, you can't gate him. Let him free, and you had to free him, did you not?
That's right.
How do you stand on that case now?
Well, the situation was that the inmate brought the case in front of the court here in BC, and the judge decided that the amendment to the Parole Act that we got during this past summer was against the Constitution. We appealed that decision, and recently the Court of Appeal here in BC has decided that indeed the Act is constitutional.
Supported your position.
That's right.
Are you not, however, handicapped in some common sense decisions by the very Charter of Rights of which so many people are proud?
Well, no, not at all. I see the Charter of Rights as not only an important document for the country, but also an instrument that can help us make better decisions. Look, many of the Charter of Rights provisions are there to ensure that the inmate is informed, that people know what is up against them, etc., which means that we get a better dialogue with the inmate, so we get better decisions.
But does that not mean that you've now got, instead of you making arbitrary decisions within the parole board, that it becomes almost a full-scale court with adversary positions and the prisoners having lawyers, when they're in fact convicts at that time?
Well, one could fear that that would happen, but it hasn't happened so far. We have quite a few lawyers appearing in front of the board as assistants to the inmates, but it has not turned
You see, it's so easy for somebody like myself to sensationalize it. We had a notorious pedophile who went to jail recently after dreadful outrages, and suddenly I see him on a television program saying, oh, I've got a dangerous offender sentence, but I shall be home in, I think he said something like 2 years and 10 months if I qualify for parole.
Well, look, I think, I don't know the case, but I think
I'm
the
not
fellow
gonna
is,
identify the case.
the fellow is quite optimistic, maybe overly optimistic. It's true that the legislation provides for parole eligibility after 3 years for dangerous offenders. But I want to tell you that we have about 50, 60 people sentenced under that legislation since 1977, and not one single of them is out today.
Mind you, I mustn't be too red-necked on this. Oh no, let me ask another question first. What were the changes that were made on mandatory supervision? Correct me if I'm wrong. If I get a 6-year sentence just now, after 2 years I'm eligible for parole.
That's right.
After 4 years I must be released.
That's right.
Now, can you stop me from being released if I've done my 4 years? Can you stop my mandatory supervision for the next 2 years?
Yeah, we can now. Last summer, Parliament passed an amendment to the Parole Act that empowers the Parole Board to stop people who have already committed dangerous crime whereby they have killed somebody or caused serious harm, if the National Parole Board believes that this person is likely to go out and do it again before the expiry of
That's
his
a new provision you
That's a
now
new
have.
provision, yeah.
Previously, you couldn't stop mandatory supervision,
That's
the
right.
last third of the sentence.
That's right.
Except-
This new act is supposed only to be applied in very exceptional cases, and we have so far used it in 70, 75 cases on a national basis.
But then again, I suppose, not to be too redneck, whoever's in that jail there now is going to come out one day, and you have got the unfortunate task of making a decision with this new power if it's safe to let them out prior to the final expiration of their sentence.
Yeah, that's a very important point, that unless people have a life sentence or an indeterminate sentence, they are going to be back on the street one day, sooner or later. So for us, it's not a question of deciding whether the person is going to come back into society or not. It's a question of when is it most safe for society to release him and under which circumstances.
You know,
That's right.
many people, I believe, and I think studies have proven it, that there is a great disparity in sentences for similar crimes, right? One man might get 10 years for a crime, another man might get 5 years for the same crime. Do the judges have to take into consideration the mandatory supervision element and add it on to the length of the sentence so that the man will serve the appropriate time?
I think that it's inevitable that when a judge considers the length of the sentence and what the appropriate sentence is, that he takes into account what he knows about parole, and he knows that after 1/3, the person will be eligible for parole, after 2/3 for mandatory supervision. So I guess that there is an element of that in sentencing. To what extent, I don't know.
Would you rather see firm sentences or viable sentences?
I would rather see more or less what we have now. I think that some changes would be appropriate, and the government is considering that. But I think it is important that we don't just open the gates from the prisons and leave people out in their society.
Can you tell me what proportion of prisoners in federal penitentiaries actually get out after 1/3 of their sentence?
Oh, this is not very many. I can tell you that in this province, for instance, 38 to 40% of those who have passed their parole eligibility date are out. The rest of them are still in the institutions. These are the latest figures I have.
Now, when we come to the mandatory supervision, if I've done my 4 years or my 6 years and
Yeah.
I go out in mandatory,
Yeah.
who looks after me? You or the prison service?
Well, it is the Correctional Service of Canada if we let you out of a federal institution.
You can stop me from coming out until my full sentence is complete now.
Yeah, if you have committed something dangerous.
But if I come out in my last 2 years, the prison service monitors me, not you.
No, we don't monitor anybody. We just make the decisions, and they take over the actual supervision.
But if I'm on parole, you monitor me, don't you?
No, we don't. It's also the Correctional Service of Canada. But if you do something wrong, they will have to report back to us, and we will decide whether you're going back into the institution or not.
Now, another thing that Mr. Kelleher was talking about the other day, special literacy programs, and I got the twisted impression that if I am illiterate, I'm liable to spend a longer time in jail than if I can read and write in any decent fashion. Is that the correct interpretation?
I think that is actually a correct description of what happens today. The thing is that the Parole Board considers whether a person is able to reintegrate as a law-abiding citizen into society. And our opinion is that if a person is able to read and write, then of course his chances of reintegrating in a decent fashion, getting a job, etc., are better than if he is illiterate. And I think it is an excellent program that the Minister and the Correctional Service of Canada have started here together to make sure that people can read and write and better reintegrate.
But that might mean that I'm going to spend longer in jail if I'm illiterate than the man in the next cell who has a high school degree.
No, that's exactly what is, that's exactly the difference. Now, there will be literacy programs in most institutions which can ensure that you learn how to read and write, and you will be run a greater chance to come back on parole.
So it won't be unfair to the illiterates in prison?
On the contrary.
Now, how many of the 12,000 odd prison population are functionally illiterate?
Well, I have heard from the Correctional Service of Canada that about half or maybe even more of them are functionally illiterate at the
all right.
grade
You came from Europe originally. How do we shape up? Are we 10,000 years behind Sweden, Denmark? Not Britain, I know it's not in very good shape. Denmark or Sweden?
No, I don't think Canada is. I think that...
but we have far more people in jail than they have.
That's right.
Per head of population.
I think that you have longer sentences than they have in Europe, and I think that we parole less in Canada than they do in Europe in general. But I also think that there is a public reaction that is stronger in this country than in most European, at least Northern European countries.
Maybe we're not as civilized.
Well, I have never considered that as a possibility.
No, sorry. Ole Ingstrup is the National Parole Board chairman. You might have questions for him after the break. Ole Ingstrup is chairman of the National Parole Board of Canada. Go ahead, please.
Jack, I'd like
Yes.
to go back just a little bit before mandatory supervision came into being. It used to be that if a man was sentenced to 3 years in jail, he was eligible for release after 2 years, and the other year he would earn for good time, for good behavior, for doing the things he's supposed to do, proper shop work and so on. And now what they done, they introduced mandatory supervision, and now this fellow still gets this, he can still lose this mandatory supervision for misbehavior, but then he kind of earns it twice because you earn it, and then, you know, the end of this time is where you've earned your time. You should be cut loose at...
Okay, earned remission, does that still apply?
Well, you see, there is a little bit of confusion here about mandatory supervision and remission. The matter of the fact is that when a person has served 2/3 of his sentence, if he has behaved in a decent and reasonable fashion in the institution, he has his sentence reduced by 1/3. Okay.
Correct.
The new thing about mandatory supervision is that instead of just leaving these fellows out on the street, out in the community, it was decided that they would be under supervision for the last third of their sentence. That is where the word mandatory supervision comes from. No matter whether he likes it or not, he is going to be under supervision for the last part
But
of
the
sentence.
old days of earned remission have gone, have they?
Well, it is still a
days a
combination
week.
of...
If he earns this time and it's given off to him for being good behavior, now at this stage of the game, the full board can say, okay, we are not cutting you loose on mandatory supervision, but this gentleman earned this time by behaving himself in prison.
That is exactly what he does now as well. He is not going to have 1/3 of his sentence cut off unless he behaves well. But if he behaves well and
But he's
gets
earning it
1/3...
twice.
No, he's not serving it twice. He still has
No.
the time off, but this time under supervision. I've
That's
got
right.
that clear. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Jack.
Yes.
Yes, my wife and I were assaulted in our home. We were broken into, and the fella got, because it was his first offense, he got a 6 months probation and a $200 fine. Do you think that's fair?
Well, I don't know neither one of us can say if it's fair or bad or stupid or soft.
Well, I think the justice system today is terrible. Now, if he ever did it again into my home, I get a club. I mean, he won't walk out this time.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
What do you say to that, Ole?
I cannot really comment on the sentence because you have to understand that I'm busy enough looking after parole. If I should be looking after sentencing as well, I would be...
You'd be gone.
Yeah.
Go ahead from Chilliwack.
Yes, I'd like to find out what the thoughts are on getting out on parole. We do get the odd time a prisoner who is in jail and who is innocent. Now, you've been saying they can get out if they behave themselves in jail and do what they're supposed to do. However, one of the items, I believe, is that they have taken responsibility for their actions. How can somebody who does happen to go to jail and is innocent maintain his innocence throughout and still get out on parole?
Well,
we have discussed that here in Burnaby as late as today, and our position is that we cannot interfere with the sentences of the court. We have to build on the assumption that the sentence is fair, it is right, the person is guilty. However...
Well, that's fine to say that part.
just a minute.
However, if we strongly feel that the person may have a point, then we will direct the case to the Attorney General or whoever is responsible for that area and ask them to look into the matter again. And it actually happens from time to time. But just the fact that the person claims that he is innocent
does not remove him.
No, it does not.
Just by the way, what are the temporary absences? UTA, unescorted temporary absence. What's that?
That means that the person gets out of prison for a short period of time, normally to visit family or for specific other reasons, and then he will return again to the institution after a certain amount of hours that is determined by either the institution or by the parole board.
You and they can give UTAs.
Yeah, we give UTAs, unescorted temporary absences, to inmates who are serving more than 5 years of imprisonment, and we've delegated the authority for the rest of the inmates to the institutional wardens who know their inmates.
I see, thank you. Go ahead from Dawson Creek.
Yes, Jack. Once an individual has been confined in because of the court of law, as we see in our society today, then they are allowed out on parole for whatever reason. They served their term or whatever, which seems to be a minimal situation in most cases. But once they are they get out and they go back out and do something that breaks the law the second time.
Yes.
And in some cases it seems even the third and the fourth. And then they are then allowed to obtain a reduced time of incarceration for whatever reason. I don't understand that, because if they are out there once, they should know that it's time to wake up, realize that you're not conforming with society's rules, and why should they then get a reduced sentence a second time around? And we see these sexual offenders going out and out and out and out, and why don't we stop that stuff? What's the parole board supposed to do but stop these people?
Look, that's the whole idea behind parole, that we want to get people out a little bit earlier than they have to go out, because that gives us a right to have a leash in them, to put them under supervision, to put special conditions on their parole. Now, if they break these conditions without committing a new offense, we may bring them right back into the institution. If they commit a new offense, they will not only be brought back in the institution to serve the rest of their sentence, but they will also get a new sentence. So the whole idea is that we're adding extra punishment to crime committed during parole, and we believe that helps society to be better protected.
Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yep.
I'd like to say to the chairman that the problem with jail right now is that it's too soft. And I'm speaking from a person who's been in jail for many years.
Mm-hmm.
That's you?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
I think they should go back to the old system with shorter sentences, but harder time. And I'm not talking about physical abuse to them. I'm just talking about take away their TVs, their radios, and so forth. Forget about these day passes, because you got to do too much bootlicking to get them. When you take away a man's respect, and he has no respect for himself, when he gets out of jail, he has no respect for anyone. And that's why you keep seeing them come back through the gates. I've seen too many people ruined in jail. I spent a good number of years in it. I've seen my friends destroyed.
But your point is that to conform to the system, you've got to become a bootlicker, and that destroys your self-respect.
Lie and do everything to get out.
Mm-hmm. What do you make of that? I can appreciate some of
Sure.
that. And if you're a good letter writer, if you're a good con man, you can get your parole a lot easier than the hard man.
I I cannot deny that there is a possibility. I mean, life is unfair to all of us. Some are more gifted than others. That is also the case for people who spend time in institutions. And it is very, very difficult to be totally fair to everybody. We try to look at the case. We try to look at the circumstances and try to pay attention to that. But of course there is a chance. However, I want to mention to you that for many, many inmates, and I have been a warden for a great many years myself, I have seen a lot of inmates who have benefited dramatically from having day passes where they could keep contact with their wives and their families and go back to these wives and families afterwards. So I would be afraid of following your advice of just cutting things shorter and making it harder and never give people a chance to get out.
Question, if I'm a person who is the victim of some outrageous criminal, and I know he's needing parole, can I write the parole board and say, please consider these facts?
Sure. Actually, we're in the process right now to look into ways of becoming less distant from victims. We actually want the victims to understand that we are responsive to them. If they have statements to make, we will welcome them. They don't even have to write to us. They can phone into our regional offices and you can find out.
And express their concern, eh?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Certainly.
That's a good point. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Mr. Ingstrup. I'd like to know, how about the young offenders between the ages of 18 to about 21, 22, 23 who have been sentenced to a long-term imprisonment? Is there anything, like, is there any way that their parole should be reduced instead of, doing the 2/3, even less than 1/3? Because on a young kid who's about 18 or 19, I think your long-term is going to have a real adverse effect.
Good question.
Very, very good question. We do not have special provisions to treat these people more leniently, but I actually believe that the judges take your point of view into consideration when they determine the length of the sentence.
It's up to the prison administration as how they segregate and handle younger offenders so they wouldn't possibly be corrupted by the old-timers.
Yes, if they go into the federal
One
system.
short call. Go ahead, please.
Yes, if someone gets out on a parole and does something wrong and is put back in jail and does part of a sentence again, is he eligible for parole again?
Yeah, in principle they are. It's part of the Parole Act, but it's obvious that we look into that matter. It's a factor that counts.
Well, my thanks to you, Ole Ingstrup. 10 months in the job as chairman. We'll see your name in the paper from time to time, every time you make a slip, if you make a slip, and I hope you don't make a slip. But I thank you for your appearance here just now.
Well, thank you.
And I'll be back after the break. Well, here I am in the office of AIDS Vancouver, and this is Bob Tivy, the director. Now, you're the oldest established AIDS organization in the country.
That's right. We've been here for 4 years, since February of 1983.
Just give me a comparison of the pressure 4 years ago and the pressure today on organizations like AIDS Vancouver.
Well, 4 years ago, we had an answering machine in somebody's basement, and we picked up the messages once a day. Actually, it was in Michael Welsh's basement, and there were maybe 3, 4, 5 calls a day. Now we are receiving over 1,000 calls a week.
It's not surprising with 15,000 people, the extrapolated figure, carrying the positive antibody. Is that correct?
That's right, and there's a large amount of concern now in the general public.
Yeah, because of the bisexual or heterosexual transfer of AIDS.
Because of the reality that it is starting to infect people outside of the high-risk
groups. Mind you, AIDS represents the high-risk group. Is that correct? Yes, that's where the concentration of cases are.
At this point, yes, it still is. Mm-hmm.
Bob, one reason I came up today was to find out what you do and how you're coping with AIDS Vancouver. We'll talk about funding later on. But
sure.
Who can I meet?
I'd like you to meet our staff. This is Michael Welsh. Michael is our coordinator of support services.
Now, what's a support service, Michael?
Support services are all the various drop-in groups and the counseling, the financial assistance, home care, family support group, all of these sort of things that we do and work with people with AIDS.
You don't actually give out financial services. You direct them to the right places to get what is available in the community.
We do financial counseling so that they get what is available to them in the community, but we also administer a fund through our office.
Good. How many people are in the care of your overall support services?
It's usually around 40 to 45 people getting active care from us at any one particular time.
Now, here is Judy. Judy, nice to meet you. You are a support worker. I want you to tell me what you do, actually. What are you on a buddy system or something?
Yes, I'm on a buddy system, and I follow 3 of our clients in the community. I spend time with them either sitting and having coffee with them in their own home, or I may go out for walks with them. I may take them to lunch. I may go out for a whole evening with them.
In other words, you're really an emotional support worker.
That's right.
Because I presume that they tend to become lonely and perhaps abandoned by some of their former friends.
That's right. Many of them are.
Are these people with active AIDS?
Yes, they are.
Must be difficult to deal with.
At times. At times. But they see us as friends. And they offer us an awful lot as well.
Yeah. Well, good for you. 3 you look after.
That's right.
All men.
All men.
Dear, dear, dear. Thanks, Judy. Now, if I can speak to Elaine.
Morning.
Elaine, your job is you work with the families. Tell me some
That's
of the
right.
problems that are around the families when they discover that a son or a husband has AIDS. We're talking about active AIDS again, right?
Right, yes. Most of the problems are that they have absolutely nobody to talk to. They cannot share their concerns with anybody else. If you had a husband who had cancer or a son who had cancer or was dying of some other disease, you could share it with your neighbors and you'd get support in the neighborhood.
It's because of the stigma of AIDS.
That's correct. And also because of their neighbors' fears of the disease and how it's caught.
Yeah. I suppose it breaks up some of your families altogether.
I don't know that it breaks them up actually. It's certainly, if people have to go from one part of the country to the other, it breaks up families temporarily. Well, a mother will come from back east to look after a son who's here in Vancouver, or a woman that we had who came all the way from Kenya and left her family for 6 months.
But any family that's got AIDS in the family and can't cope with it can call you at AIDS Vancouver.
Yes, they can.
Have you got enough help and volunteers to send people out to help these families?
We're working on getting more. We can use lots of people.
Yeah, but I don't suppose people are rushing in to do the job, are they?
Not rushing in, but we do have a number who come. I also work with women who have AIDS, and we have several of those. So it is not just gay men.
No, fair enough. Now, Brian Paul, Meals on Wheels. What is your precise job?
I do home care for people with AIDS, Jack.
How many cases are you looking after just now?
We're looking after approximately 35 to 40 at any given time.
Now, are these single men living alone?
These are single men. We've looked after women as well. In a lot of cases, there are people living at home who don't have a support network, who may be counted on family or friends and have experienced the desertion that some of these people
Now, who
have.
supplies and cares for and pays for this home help?
It's all done on a volunteer basis at this point. There are about 60 volunteers providing home care, and we've got men and women. We've got some older retired people, a real reflection of the community at large.
What about the MHR resources like Meals on Wheels? You can order and obtain that for people who don't have financial resources of their own, can you?
We can get Meals on Wheels delivered by volunteers and either paid for by the client, or AIDS Vancouver will pay for it if there's financial need.
If there's financial need.
Yeah.
Is it quite successful?
It's very successful. I think it's made the key difference for people who want to remain in the home while they're sick.
You'll probably need a lot more this time next year.
We certainly will, at
Any
least double.
idea? At least double.
I would say.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Now, one of the services in AIDS Vancouver is a hotline where people with concerns and problems can phone in. Good morning. Your name again?
Roy, Jack.
Tell me, Roy, how many calls a day would you get in a busy day?
It seems to go non-stop.
Who are the people that call in terms of what their worries are?
When I first started, it was mostly the high-risk groups, but now it's predominantly the community at large. And their concerns seem to be centered around the test information, where they can get it done and how they go about doing it, and also about how if they really were at risk.
Yeah, in other words, there'll be a fair amount, a little touch of hysteria or panic, perhaps unreasonably in some cases.
In some cases, and that's why this phone line is so valuable, because it enables them to get the information so that they know really whether or not they were at risk.
You might say, well, you've told me a little bit about yourself. Maybe you should go and get the positive antibodies test. Hey, would you do that?
Well, I'd like to explore what you've done that makes you think that you need to have the test done.
Mind you, they tell me the provincial testing centre is jammed until the end of March now.
But there is a way of you getting the test done if you feel that you need to have it.
What's that?
It's through your family doctor.
Yeah, you get the blood test in his office, and then it comes back through the system in due course.
That's right.
So all in all, how many calls would you get on a really busy day by yourself on the phone here?
I think I would probably handle in a 4-hour shift maybe about 15 calls an hour.
Is that so? And then what time are you available? There it goes
10
again.
till 6.
10 to 6 at night, the phones are operating.
That's right.
Thanks very much.
No trouble.
From AIDS Vancouver, I'll be back after the break. Now we're going to meet Leslie Wagman, who's the Director of Education, Prevention of AIDS for AIDS Vancouver.
Hello.
Leslie, I've got to tell you, I got quite upset when I saw you give that first shot on television with all the phallic symbols and the graphic descriptions and the kids tittering, you know. Wasn't that overdone a bit?
Well, you only saw a very small part of the whole program. It's just the actual end that you saw. It's really important to give students an opportunity to explore what a condom actually looks like, what well, the package that it comes in, so they have some idea of, you know, what this item is when they need to use it.
It looked a little bit prurient, you know, with all the giggling and whatnot. Now, maybe I'm wrong on that, but are you still doing that kind of thing in the schools around here?
Well, we do it in a very sensitive way. We feel that we need to add some kind of lightness to this whole area. It's very difficult to teach about, you know, AIDS because of the issue of death and the fact that students have to be very, very aware of what high-risk behavior is so that they can protect themselves. And we're not suggesting, you know, that every student should be going out and using condoms. It's if they're sexually active, they need to know how to protect themselves.
There are people in the province, of course, who say that the very mention of safe sex means an outbreak of promiscuity among young people. And one must respect their views, even if you don't agree with them, up to a point. Even the Premier talks about abstinence, which many people regard as highly impractical in most cases, right?
Yes, that's true. I mean, that's only one of the choices. I mean, I think we have to be aware that people don't just head towards one direction, that they do look at a number of things.
And, of course, in the school program, there must be some moral values put into teaching.
Oh, of course. I think the most important thing to get across is responsible decision-making.
Well, you're still going on your education kick all the way around.
Yes.
Are you the only person who does it?
No, we have about 5 or 6 trained volunteers who also go into the schools and provide the programs.
Well, every person that avoids AIDS, that's another victory, is it not?
Well, it's true. We need to be able to provide as much education as possible. It's our best prevention.
Now to wrap it up with Bob Tivy. Bob, do you accept the figures which are commonly used by the medical profession here, 211 dead in Vancouver, 500 to 1,000 with ARC, and 15,000 positive antibody carriers?
Yes, at least that, Jack. We figure that those are conservative estimates. The actual number of people testing positive to the virus may be as high as 25,000.
Is there any kind of panic? I mean, you're getting all these calls on the hotline from people who are probably reading that unless you know the sexual history of your partner over the past 7 or 8 years, you could catch AIDS. Is there not a fair amount of unnecessary panic in that interpretation, depending on where you live in the country?
Yes, there is a lot of irrational fear. And I would suggest for people that are outside of the high-risk groups that there is very little for them to worry about. I think there are a few exceptions. Women that may have had sex with a bisexual man or an intravenous drug user and are thinking of having a child, that woman maybe should be tested before she gets pregnant.
Yeah, so the high-risk group, of course, 80% of the cases are in the male homosexual.
At this time, yes.
You seem to be doing not too badly in financing. I see the federal government has committed $39 million over 5 years for research and education. Is that enough from your point of view?
It's a pit in the bucket. We need a lot more. Countries that have far fewer cases of AIDS are spending much, much more money. $39 million over 5 years is for everything. It's for research, for education, for laboratories.
Vital testing.
Yes, absolutely. We need at least double that.
Now, your operation here, who finances it? The federal government gives you how much, 100,000?
The federal government have committed $150,000 for 2 years, and the city of Vancouver has committed $100,000 for 2 years.
You have some paid staff here?
We have 6 paid staff at the moment, yes.
But you mostly run on volunteers. Now,
we have volunteers, 225 of them.
what about hospital care and home care? St. Paul's is generally the hospital where those with full-blown AIDS go, correct?
Yes, we're having a problem with the whole issue around care. We need to think in new ways. We need a hospice facility as well as additional beds in hospitals.
You mean a hospice, kind of palliative care for terminally ill patients?
Yes, the medical system is not prepared for the large numbers of people that are going to be dying, and we need to have a place where people can go when they are in the terminal stages of this illness.
We're told 200-odd dead this year. It could be 400-odd dead next year.
Mm-hmm.
Well, quarantine has been suggested.
Yeah.
Separate hospitals might be not a bad idea.
Well, a special facility for people with AIDS is one thing. Quarantine is quite another. And we have to remember, when we talk about quarantining people with AIDS, we're talking about a very small percentage of the problem. And we force the whole disease underground. People that need to be tested, people that may be infected, would be afraid to come to the hospital for fear of being quarantined.
I bet there are many young people thinking now, people who are healthy and virginal, if you like, who think, how can I possibly not marry now without having my partner tested for AIDS? Now, that would be hysterical at this stage, would it not?
It would be hysterical at this stage. I would say that young people who may have been very sexually active, who are now getting married and thinking of having children, I think the test should be optional for those people. If they wish to have it, if they feel they may have been exposed, then maybe it's a good idea to get the test.
I think you might compliment the media on the blunt way which it is doing its share of public education. And if the media keeps that up without being hysterical, that will fill a lot of the need for public education, will it not?
We've been very fortunate for the most part in British Columbia in that the media has been responsible, has done very accurate reporting. We don't want the average person out there to be hysterical, but we do want them to be concerned, and we do want pressure to be put on governments to respond in an appropriate way.
Education, of course, must come in various ways because of the sensitivity of groups which must be recognized.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we realize that when we're talking about sex outside of marriage, that we're plugging into some people's moral and religious values. We want to be very sensitive to that.
Do you think this, I'm not going to call it a black plague or a bubonic plague, but it is a very worrying epidemic. Do you think it can be beaten within the foreseeable future? What's your own gut feeling, Bob?
I'm afraid the outlook is very bleak, Jack. What we have to do is we have to stop the spread of this disease in its track. We have to get information out to everybody on risk reduction. People are not going to stop having sex. People are certainly going to be more conservative in the future and probably have less sexual partners.
One question. What do you tell worried callers when they have read statistics in the paper that up to 36 or 38% of those carrying the positive antibody are going to develop the disease? That's the most worrying thing of all.
That is very frightening. A couple of years ago, we were saying 5%. Now it's up to 30 or 35%. We may see that go higher in the future. It's quite overwhelming when we look out there 5 years from now, what we're going to be dealing with.
It'll change the sexual habits of the world.
It certainly will.
Thanks, Bob Tivy, Director, AIDS Vancouver.
You're welcome, Jack.
Twice I used the wrong figure in my AIDS report. There's 211 thereabouts dead and dying. Not all dead. Tomorrow, Sir Geoffrey Palmer, the Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand, and also Bob Skelly, speaking for the NDP and the reaction to Mr. Vander Zalm's speech from the throne, at 5 p.m. precisely.